Mr. Satyarth Nayak is an author and a scriptwriter. His debut novel, The Emperor's Riddle, released in 2015, became a best-selling thriller and also earned him acclaim from writers like Amish Tripathi and Ashwin Sanghi and comparisons with Dan Brown. His short stories have won the British Council Writers' Circle Prize and also featured in the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. Mr. Shovon Choudhury is a Delhi-based writer whose blog India Update has over 2 lakh hits, and that speaks a lot for this immature humorist. He's the creator of the Trilokpuri incident, which is trying to understand an event that no one can remember. He's also the entire reporting staff of The Investigator, which digs for the truth, so you don't have to. He has recently edited The Secret Diaries of Manmohan Singh, aged 82 3/4. His first novel, The Competent Authority, was finalist for a wide variety of prizes. His new book, Murder with Bengali Characteristics, is set in a near future Kolkata occupied by China. Okay, I would request Mr. Satyarth to take this session forward from here.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha, and welcome to OLF 2015. It's always wonderful to come back to OLF. We had a wonderful session last year called New Voices, and this year, the session that we are doing is kind of quite prophetically titled, The Printed Book Will Never Die. I want to start this session by asking a question, and not to this panel here, but to this huge gathering out here. I'm sure all of you love to read books. So let's have a quick show of hands. How many here love to read the ebook? They think it's cool and convenient. Let's have a quick show of hands. How many ebook readers out here? Okay. Right, and how many here still love to read and hold the good old printed book? Wow. So obviously the printed word still holds fort. I see the spectacle and it gives me a lot of joy. At the same time, I also get to hear that the Oxford English Dictionary and the new edition that's coming out very soon, that will no longer be in print. It will only be an electronic version. I also get to hear that the Encyclopedia Britannica has decided to stop printing after more than 200 years. It will only be an online presence. So Pushpesh, to start with you, on one hand, obviously, extremely huge support for the printed word, and yet we have these iconic books deciding to go out of print. What is going on?
I must apologize because वो डीपी और सचिन के दोनों के बाद मुझे बहुत I'm almost feeling like a traitor कि मैं हिंदी भाषी हूँ, हिंदी में पढ़ा हूँ, गंवई गांव कस्बाती आदमी हूँ और मैं अंग्रेजी में बोलूँ तो मुझे बड़ी पीड़ा उससे हो रही है और मुझे बड़ा अच्छा लग रहा था बट मुझे पहले आगाह किया गया है कि दिस सेशन इज इन इंग्लिश सो विल गो बैक टू कीप रिवर्टिंग बैक एंड फॉर्थ बट आई डू थिंक दैट द प्रिंटेड बुक कैन नेवर डाई बिकॉज द इलेक्ट्रॉनिक बुक इज कन्वीनियंट but it doesn't give me the joys of Alex Comfort was the author, joys of sex. Now I mean I can't get sex out of my mind. I'm a dirty old man.
So much better video if you have
the video book.
No, if you would have video but 5.5 inch screen and the image size would not even let you see the private unmentionable part of a hero or a heroine with a microscope. So let's not get into that. I would prefer that in a 70 millimeter screen if I may have it. I would say that the problem is that the joy of a book, like a joy of sex, is so much sensual. You fondle a book, you open it, it is printed, it is mint fresh, it smells of paper. Now you don't get leather-bound books, but you enjoy the ink, you enjoy the grammage of the paper, you have the quality of binding, and the difference between a paperback and a hardback, it itself is great. The sizes of the books, octavo, crown, whatever it is. I mean, the joy of handling a book is almost like fondling a person.
Yeah.
So I think that this Kindle or whatever can't ever match. No,
right.
Not for me ever.
Shovon, would you agree this whole tactile experience of,
Yeah.
of a book,
Yeah.
the joy, the feel, the touch, also the joy of sharing a book with a friend, displaying a wonderful book on your shelf, that entire experience, one who's addicted to that will not really give that up so easily for a cold machine like Kindle.
See, I wouldn't talk too much about touching things beyond the point because there are so many children present. But I think that what struck me very powerfully right now was that little test that you just took where you asked people to raise their hands if they read an e-book. So maybe 5 people raised their hands.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then when you ask people whether they were reading actual books, maybe 50 people raised their hands.
Yeah.
There are much more than 50 people in this room.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think the much bigger issue is, about books per se. And it's kind of connected to the digital medium because the two go hand in hand. It's like a feedback system.
Sure.
But attention span deficit is a big problem right now.
Right.
I think that all of you who are here in media, you face it all the time.
Sure.
You know, that you can't get people to read articles through from the
Absolutely,
beginning to the end.
that's very true.
You know, people are making 300-word articles and 50-word articles and God knows what else. Tomorrow it'll all be tweets.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a bigger concern. You know, and because if there's no demand for the product, then the format becomes very irrelevant. You know,
Exactly.
whether it's paper or printed on platinum, that doesn't particularly matter.
Absolutely.
You know, but if it's a question of choosing between those two things, I just want to say that, yeah, you know, there was a time I'm sure in ancient Egypt, there was a bunch of people who were saying, papyrus will never die, man. Papyrus is here forever. Have you that feel, you know, when you touch papyrus, that sensation, you know?
Exactly,
So we don't know who they were because they didn't win that battle, right? So, but they were doing it, no doubt.
They were doing it, absolutely.
So I think you can't stop the march of progress. Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
ultimately, writing is a consumption of a form of it's a consumption of something.
Absolutely.
Like you consume music or you consume video.
Right.
So just like those formats have changed over time. I mean, you know, when we were young, we were all listening to LP records.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you know, the cover of an LP record was like an art form. I mean, you still remember the Sholay cover. I mean, so many of them,
Yes,
right?
yes.
We live with them.
Yes,
You know, but it's all gone. You know, and we don't really feel the lack of it. A few aficionados have kind of stuck with that whole thing.
yes.
The
The
ones who
whole
think,
gramophone
oh,
and
that's
all of
real
that,
audio.
yeah.
So yes, sure, people who want a real experience in terms of books in the sense of touching it, feeling it, they might stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, you might see a sort of a segmentation in the sense that some very, very, you know, more artistic books or books
Right.
aimed at a particular audience
Right.
might be printed, while a
Right.
lot of the others might not be
Sure.
actually printed.
Sure.
They'd be more digital. Hard to tell. I mean, you can never predict this stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, who could have predicted that all the DVD shops would have gone out of
disappear.
business in the
Yeah,
last
absolutely.
18 months?
Very
But
true.
that's what
And
seems to
attention
happen.
span is a very important point. I remember there was a recent article that I wrote for the Quint.
Yeah.
And when I see the article finally online, every line is separate. And there's apparently a theory that online the attention span for every line is just about 10 seconds. So they have to, you know, every line has to be separate from each other. So even the online medium is facing its, you know, its own set of problems regarding that. So yeah. Okay, talking about the longevity of printed books, I think the one monster that everyone talks about is, of course, the e-book or the electronic book. It was 2007 when Amazon let loose this monster called Kindle. And interestingly, within 5 years, by 2012, e-books had hit a huge boom. It really peaked like mad. And that was when this whole debate started heating up, you know, e-book versus printed book. As if these are these two gladiators, you know, out in the arena battling for some kind of supremacy. And suddenly you heard about shifting paradigms and new business models, and suddenly readers had to suddenly choose and be loyal to one book or the other. Chandrahas, is there really a battle going on, or are these battle lines completely imaginary?
Well, these battle lines are not imaginary, but I just think when you try and argue about these things, either one tends to come across sounding extremely romantic and detached because you feel that since you grew up in a culture of print, therefore there's some natural virtue about print that should be preserved, and the younger generation have some duty to preserve. If they don't, they're not part of tradition or whatever, which I think,
Right.
I don't think that is a very sort of legitimate basis for argument. But I also think that, you know, we are looking at two data sets and trying to compare them from very different. It's like comparing like the Ice Age with what has happened in the last century. The printed book, let's not forget, is one of the most, not only is it one of the most durable mediums since its invention, but it's remarkable that it really hasn't changed a lot. If you look, you would imagine that with a particular kind of technology, which the printed book also is, although it looks like something that is not technology, it is also kind of technology. The fact that you have two pages opposite one another, that they're bound together, that there's a cover on either side of them, these are not like something natural to the book. That they were all thought of by some people at the start of the book age, and then either readers accepted them or rejected them. Different books came to different sizes. There were prayer books which could fit in the pocket or a monk's robe. So even the book is a very creative kind of technology, and when you look back 500 or 600 years to today, the essential features of the book have not changed, which suggests there's something about it which is not, like, as someone I once, as a Danish writer once knew, used to say to me in a sort of very sort of roundabout English, I think the book is a genius medium, which in a way it is, because if we look at the history of books in our time, in the 15 or 20 or 30 years that we've been reading books and consuming music, common to the last 20 or 30 years. Music has gone through so many forms of storage.
Absolutely,
And each time the previous default setting of the industry is then completely vanquished and it'll start all over again. Whereas I think we are kind of fortunate with books that there's a core of the book world upon which other new layers are emerging or that people consume in a different way. And there's something then, like when you start comparing these things, there's something that suggests that in a way, there is something about the printed book that is that cannot be separated from the meanings inside the printed book. And you cannot say that about some other kinds of artistic forms of storage where you could just say that the thing that you consume the music in is separate from what the music is and you just transfer it. Maybe you can get better quality out of an MP3 than you can out of a CD. So there's something about book culture that, and I was trying to think about what it could be. And I think this is true of a lot of us writers. In a way, like people always ask, do you write for yourself? Do you write for an audience? I think Amitabh Ghosh put it very beautifully. Maybe it's a secret that we don't want to share with other people. We kind of write for our bookshelf. And what our bookshelf is, the kind of writers, like often people ask me, so you live with your family? I say, I do, but I live, they're a virtual, in a way they're a virtual family, although because I live with my books and I'm not with any other human beings.
Absolutely.
And in a way, I was trying to ask myself sometimes, I always find, because I travel a lot, I always find that I write better at home than I do when I'm traveling, although it's the same mind that I carry everywhere. And maybe I thought maybe that's because I'm alone at home and I'm not when I travel. But even when I find I'm in a hotel room, I never write as well as in my own house. I kind of feel that all of us who love the printed book have a sense of our own autobiography, of our own self as dispersed among the books in our library. And in a way, when you go back home, as you do when you go back to see your family, you kind of recover yourself. And if that is the case, then that would be a very hard part of human experience to give up just for a digital library on a laptop.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think, you have a relationship with a printed book, which is almost a personal relationship. And in deference to censorship and younger audience, I will avoid references to touches and other sensual delights which a book offers. But I would say that you have a book with which, a printed book with which you have a personal relationship is like a member of the family. You come home after a long journey, you see a familiarly dog-eared book with a torn dust jacket, and you say, I met an old friend. And you would like to read the same old classic or a bestseller in the format which you are most familiar with. You maybe have a spare copy in a paperback to travel with you. It often happens with poetry. You don't want to lose a cherished book which you bought as a youngster. And I was talking to a young friend here that a bookseller not makes me buy a book, I buy the books myself, but seduces me into, if the verb is permissible here, the bookseller seduces me into buying books because he's been giving me books on credit since I was a 17-year-old student. Now, I'm not going to part with that copy of the book which I picked up my poetry, 20 love songs and a song of despair by Neruda. I have another version which I lend to friends to see that you can read this, but I don't part with it. And I think it happens to many of us that the precocious autobiography of Eugene Evtushenko or Dom Morris's poem, It Snowed That Night When I Lost My Innocence, what some call innocence, things of that kind. Or Dom Morris says, How Soon Our Children Make Us Die, when he sees the smoke billowing from the poop of the kid. Now, I don't think that you relive that moment on an electronic book at all. So you live and die. And there is this evanescence of life. And that which a printed book makes you realize that your pages of personal life are yellowing like the pages of the book. You are also fading like a photograph or a press picture in between, which I think this perfectly working gadget never lets you feel.
That's very true, actually. Also, very recently, I came across this very interesting GIF on Facebook, which tells you about the evolution of the study desk. Now, you start with a normal study desk. It has everything. There are, of course, the notepad, the books, the calendar, the dictionary, the calculator, everything around it. And as you start evolving and coming towards 2015, you only have a computer, and everything around it has been sucked into the screen and has become an icon. So this whole debate, is it also to do about a fundamental fear of technology? The whole idea that maybe one day humans also might get sucked into this, what the Britishers are now calling the black mirror, into a screen and probably become icons one day. Is there a fear of technology in resisting change and the fear that everything pre-existing is going to die? Is that somewhere inherently in this whole debate?
We're all scared of technology in some way or the other. I mean, that's a staple of fiction, right? I mean, what technology can do for you. Since the 19th century, people have been doing that.
Right.
So of course there's that. But I just wanted to, when you're talking about the question I wanted to address was when we said that the printed book will never die.
Yeah.
That's a very universal statement. It probably helps for us to approach it if we break it down and look at for who are we looking at. For example, if you take school children in this country,
Yes.
and we had this smashing panel which really raised the bar just now and made me extraordinarily nervous. In that panel they were talking about the adoption of Hindi and how will Hindi become popular.
Yeah.
One reason for that is there aren't enough kids' books in Hindi, like you're mentioning right now. That there are not enough kids' books.
Right.
And my wife works in education. She's been doing it for 25 years. And one of the things we discovered was that kids don't have enough books. If you look at the UK, for example, if you take the sum total of children's books and you divide it by the sum total of children, it comes to about 600 books per child is the block or the stock of books available for them. In India, that number, according to, I think, Tulika, is about 2 or 3, 2.5 or 2.7. So that's the total number of books that each kid has available. 50% of those are in English, 50% are in all the other languages put together. So now if you start think about how many actually Hindi books there are, physical, available for children. Think of how many there are available for, Bengali children or children in Orissa. It's insignificant.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, we can sit here and hope about the printed word never dying, but the only way to stop it is to have, more books for kids.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's going. And in that area, when you look at the average government school, we all hope the country is going to evolve and great things are going to happen, but can you really visualize government school children, even in the next 20 years, all of them having tablets in their hands? They won't.
Yeah.
So they are going to need print, and that's one reason to keep this ecosystem alive.
Absolutely.
The reason why out of, some 13 crore copies of newspapers sold every day, 50% of them are Hindi, is because the newspaper is the cheapest form to learn or understand anything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't have to buy a mobile phone, you don't have to have an internet connection. You just pick it up at the chai shop. If somebody is reading it, you just borrow it from him. And so we live in such a strange country that, I say that, I'm influenced by science fiction a lot. And so I think that, H.G. Wells' Time Machine, where you have two completely different types of people. Some people who live above the ground, they live their fairy tale lives where, they value the sensuousness of the tactileness of the book. Some of them, others are totally into technology. They just follow video and audio because you can clearly see that.
Yes.
Because ultimately, what is a book? It's a form of telling a story.
Absolutely.
And you're usually dependent on your skill as a writer to, bring that story alive. But you could also cheat and show videos, right? Instead of describing something tomorrow, you could just click, as long as it's convenient.
Yes. That's
It's the technology is evolving at a scary, and there, I just say, Chandrahas, that that's a brilliant point, that the book is a very durable, and it's a technology that lasted for so many centuries. But, the thing is, the last 20, 30 years have seen a lot of amazing things happening. Look at Uber. Even 3 years ago, who'd ever heard of it, at least in India? Who knew anything about it? So the ways of consuming a story are definitely going to change. And people by nature are, they want it to be easier. Rather, what have we got now as a trend? Instead of waiting for each episode of a program to come out, people binge watch. They watch 12 of it because they don't want to wait. It's now easier to watch the whole thing, so why not then? So while there is always going to be an audience for people who, appreciate the fine literary craftsmanship that, say, someone like Chandrahas practices, and they know that he's put 5 or 7 years of his life into just putting these 200 pages together, and they savor every word. There will be people like that. But if you look at the gross block of, it depends. If the children on the ground actually have access to more books, then there'll be more printed books.
Exactly.
But if we go in a more elitist direction in this country, then we'll have less printed books. That seems to be how it
In
would
fact,
probably
it's interesting because you
pan out.
raised the point about children. That's one of the points I wanted to raise. Because also, let's face it, children's books are also supposed to be sensory. The whole idea is, because it's supposed to, the whole idea is that it should stimulate cognitive growth and, mental development and all of that. So that is something that can't really be replicated into e-books. So that's an interesting point that I wanted to make. So in a way, children's books could probably be some kind of a savior for the printed book in a way. Yeah, and also regional literature, Chandrahas, like Odia literature, Hindi literature. Let's face it, Kindle still primarily is publishing English literature, right? A lot of literature in India is regional, and that remains untouched by Kindle or the e-book phenomena. So using that is also one aspect that will probably ensure the longevity of the printed book, regional literature?
Recently, there's been a lot of digitization of Oriya literature, and when you get the collected works of some of the great Oriya writers, now you actually buy it on CD rather than the whole set, and you can immediately see why. You know, for the price of like 300 or 400 rupees, you get the chance to get perhaps the work of someone you don't know at all, whereas otherwise you would have to buy, and I don't know, for some reason Oriya writers seem to be extremely prolific as you look at from the bios of all the Oriya writers on our festival sheet. They've all written like 40 or 50 books in their lifetime. I do think literature is particularly fortunate in that there's a room for all of these media to go towards sometimes complementing each other. But at the separate level, I actually think print culture, when I was in college, I think one of the intellectual schemes, I guess, that has proved most useful to me in my life has been when a professor of mine taught these poems by William Blake, who's a great favorite of mine, called The Songs of Innocence and Experience.
Yeah, William Blake.
It is about, they seem like children's poems, but actually there's something a little deeper and darker going on in there.
Yes,
but the point of that scheme, when you read these poems, that in this world, some things seem to be very innocent, children, lambs, and some things seem to be like dark or dangerous, like the worm, the tiger, which prey on everything else. But curiously, it's not as if like these are the only two states possible. There's some characters in the scheme who go through experience and return with a kind of redeemed innocence, who are like, it's not that they are like so insecure or so fragile that the innocence is always waiting to be corrupted.
I remember the chimney sweeper was a
great
character.
Exactly. They sort of go through the darkest, or they go through whatever is opposite to them and come out with some sense of having lived through that experience.
Right.
And in the same way, I feel that actually we should in some way encourage, if people are like falling away from print culture, which in some way should encourage that, because it allows everybody to work out for themselves what the other kind of reading means. And actually feel like the book, one of the reasons why the book is revived after 8 to 9 years of falling away through into other media, is that people are a bit tired of, like, the mobile phone in a way has led to the revival of the book, because people are really tired of doing everything on a screen anymore. When you go to work, you look at the laptop all day long. Then in the middle, in your breaks, you're always in your mobile phone on WhatsApp or on Facebook or whatever. And you want some part of your life to fall away from like having to be charged up. And because I think the most common complaint in India today is like, my phone, where is my charger? Or like I left my charger at home. In a civilization like that, I do think a book allows for a kind of slowness and, medium that has no other connections, like you cannot jump out to check out, to update your status, whatever. You would have to leave the technology to go somewhere else. And, so I do think at some point there will be a kind of digital fatigue, because so many other things are being digitized about our lives along with books. So in some cases, we mix up that book life with all these other kinds of lives. And then after that, beyond that, there will be another life for the book. And maybe it will be a different life from the time when it reigned champion and everybody just thought books are something very wonderful. I also wanted to say that, everybody, lots of people say, book publishers don't publish anymore and they aren't publishing interesting stuff and it's all going to ebooks. I have some sympathy with book publishing in this regard, because we have to know the difference between book publishing of the kind you see when you go out right now and buy our books or the books of other writers here outside the bookstall. These are books in which somebody has already made an investment of money. So in order to recoup 200 or 300 rupees at a time from people like us, somebody has spent a large amount of capital, 10, 15 lakh of rupees. And whereas with digital books, what you do is make one copy and then it doesn't cost anything beyond that initial thing. And whatever so there's a kind of synergy of sales and production, where it's only when you make a sale that you incur production costs. And in a capitalistic world, how can you put the pressure on some parts of a literary culture to bear all the a book is also a part of a market. It's an economic product. We try to think of it as something more romantic. Of course it is. But how can we pressure some sort of gatekeepers or some capital holders in a society to bear the entire cost of literature? There has to be some other way as well.
Also, something similar to what you were saying, self-publishing has become a huge phenomenon now, and the ebook allows that. In a way, theoretically, writers don't need traditional publishing anymore. You can just get your book out there as a self-published product. Do you think that could be also a possible threat to the printed word, self-publishing? Do you see that as something that we need to take care of?
No. I just think that self-publishing has always happened. I mean, sometimes we try to isolate it. I remember at one time R.K. Narayan thought that his publishers weren't giving his royalties. And I know from speaking with writers from many other sort of regional literary cultures that sometimes publishing there is less professional, and once you get your advance, you can be sure you're never going to get another penny of royalties ever, and that advance is usually very small. So lots of writers have just, whether out of vexation, whether out of genuine belief in themselves, have always, like, I remember R.K. Narayan started his own publication house called Indian Thought, I think it was. It was only for his own books, and he felt he already had an audience, and he just had to take over control of the means of production to make sure that he got the value that he was worth.
Right.
So I have no particular beef with self-publishing, but it does seem to me that, again, something about print culture was the fact that there was a kind of assurance of quality about it. When you bought, even now, when you look at the spine of a book and see that there's a Penguin or HarperCollins, you know that somebody has written the book, then it's gone to an editor, then it's been copy edited by somebody. And there are all these layers of quality which you go through.
Right.
In a more democratizing age, I think it's a legitimate question for many people to ask. You know, I think I'm the most brilliant writer on this planet. Just that nobody believes this to be true. I will make sure that I bring my own books out. And I think one of the stories of our time, so a lot of the major publishers now have a parallel self-publishing program. I know Penguin has another bird on its list called Partridge. I don't know whether it's a fatter or a thinner bird where you can... Okay. Where actually you don't need to do anything. You have written a story, you just sign up with them, they have a publishing service and an editing service, and there's no sense that there's no no's in the process. You want, you get.
You get, exactly.
So these are trends of our time which, in a sort of democratizing age where technology is being democratized, I don't think anybody should pretend this lead. It may be that it makes for a more confused culture, but I don't know that this can be resisted or that one can put so many value judgments. All it does is place pressure on readers to be more sensitive readers and to make their own evaluative hierarchy. These are the best things on view today.
Absolutely, and very heartening words. And equally heartening also is to see that despite all these virtues of ebooks that we're talking about, now despite that entire boom of 2012, that hasn't been replicated. Now if you see the current scenario, ebooks are flatlined. They have now kind of plateaued at about 30% of the market, which is not really that big number. And recently, Tim Waterstone, who is the founder of the Waterstone chain of bookstores in Britain, he almost, spelled out an obituary when he said that the e-book is nothing more than a declining fad. Would you agree? E-book is a declining fad?
I probably want to be left with a non-digital thing. I also am tempted. I have a Kindle, but why not a Kindle? If I'm having an iBook or a mini iPad, the temptation is that I will switch from a book and go to some other one. The 3G is working. I can probably go and have a small film clip. I can go to YouTube. My reading would be interrupted. So I think if I'm interested in reading, and then something which you said about the newspaper is interesting. I think newspaper, again, most of us think in terms of news. And I recall once I was getting my chappal, takvawed at the Mochi Kolhapuri Chappal, and he had an old newspaper, and newspaper probably is the only printed medium which is a life after death. The next day when it is raddi, when chappal is wrapped into it, and that torn piece of newspaper still has letters which are akshar, which literally means something which doesn't die. And then you read something, छोटे से अखबार के चिथड़े में, there was maybe a bit of a poem, a bit of a headline which was poetic, maybe there was a news item which makes you think, and it transports you into a different world altogether, which I don't think this blank screen ever does.
And
I don't think it's a fad, but I think you did make a very interesting point, that in a country where the high-speed 3G works, average upload 2.5, download 0.37. What do you think? And you'll go around the city of future where Airtel guarantees you, I have a lease line at home, I pay for a 16 GB guaranteed download, it has never exceeded 3.75, ever. So you can pick up your smartphones and generally do the needful. How long will it take to download? How long will it do? And so on and so forth. So I think the publishers in India have got on to a trend. That trend may pay off, become a commercial success. I don't think so. But then I'm a prejudiced party. I'm one of those Luddite romantic people.
So picking up from that, would you also say that a book is by nature low-tech? If the more you keep jazzing it up with all kinds of stuff, like he's talking about, they don't become enhancements, they actually become distractions, So,
well, it's
it's like anything that people consume. I mean, it's like cars. I mean, you can have a Nano, you can have a Rolls Royce. You know, it depends on what people want. But certainly the entry barrier is very low, which means that it's hard to foresee a situation where, you know, everything is going to become digital. Eventually it will. And certainly there's going to probably be a big difference between, say, Korea and India in terms of, you know, how they consume the written world. But for the time being, certainly it's extremely low tech. I mean, and you've got the potential for volumes. I mean, we've talked about the downside of, you know, people not reading enough Hindi books and all that. But supposing people start reading Hindi books, imagine the volumes they'll sell. Imagine the number of people, you know, the potential market that exists for that. And, you know, maybe a book at 50 rupees, you know, even if it's short, you know, but the story is good. That might be a way of, you know, I mean, I know for a fact, I mean, I know very little about, I mean, you maybe know more, but I know that translations of Taslima Nasreen sell by the truckload in Bihar and UP, which is kind of touching in a way, to think that there are so many women who are touched by this person from so far away, and who clearly doesn't, you know, belong to a society which connects with them in any form. And yet, there's something, I mean, we might laugh at her, and I know many people do, but she's touching people in some way, you know, and selling. So, you know, if the story is right, and so the printed book, I want to, you know, I think I'm responding to some of my own biases, you know, as a writer. For me, the digital thing, the whole thing of being able to use a tablet, it's incredibly convenient. I think, you know, I mean, when you're doing research, for example, and you've got a book open on your tablet and you're taking notes, all you have to do is cut paste from one and put it in the other, and you've created your file, right? Whereas if you're reading a book, you've got a phone in one hand and a book in the other, or you're sitting in front of the computer, and God help you if it's a hardcover. You know, you're trying. So it's a bit of a, so process, the sheer convenience makes it something very useful for a working writer, you know, if you're
you mentioned Taslima Nasreen, which tempts me to add this one. I mean, I can't get my mind off that. Taslima Nasreen's translation, Dena Mujhe Aur Prem, was printed by Vani. But I don't buy the thesis that it sold number of copies in Bihar and UP. I had a problem getting it from the publisher in Delhi. They could not give me, they sent me, I left money behind, and they sent me the wrong translation. I wanted the translation done by Prayag Shukla, Dena Mujhe Aur Prem. The total print run was about 1,100 copies, so it could not have sold thousands. And I don't think that ladies in Bihar and UP, the Savita Bhabis of the world, read that book, who were on their feminist discourse. I think most people who loved poetry bought it, 70-year-old people like me, who wanted a particular poem that how an old man falls in love with a 16-year-old girl. I mean, this is getting very, again, risky territory.
That's the kind of story you like. Tone down.
No, there is another poem in the same book. You are familiar with Taslima Nasreen and the Her Love poems. There is a poem written by a 17-year-old girl who falls with a much older person. So there are poems in love with a younger person, poem in love with an older person. Now, I think that's where the tablet is convenient. If you are treading into territory which is prohibited in a particular social milieu, probably having a book on display by Taslima Nasreen would be inviting trouble. And a tablet might be helpful. That's the only circumstance where I would, where the motivation is primarily consuming pornography, I would think that tablet is a very convenient device.
I'm sure that's 90% of the reason why people buy them.
Also, he's talking about the whole health hazards of, you know, of the ebook, and you know, you keep hearing stuff like apparently the human mind can process the printed word better than the digital word. That is, we hear that a lot, that it helps a lot more in cognitive development, all of that. Would you agree with that statement? Do you think a printed word works better on the human mind than a digital word?
I don't think so. I mean, this is does not conform to my own experience. Actually, I think if I look at my entire life, I can think of how the many ways in which my literary life was enabled by the digital word. For instance, I was talking about the economics of access. When I was a student at that time in the late 90s, you had the online literary world was very, very small. I would like reading the New Yorker. I had a subscription in the American Library in Delhi. And I would go on Saturday mornings to try and read the new issue. And sometimes you'd walk up the steps and you could see it lying there on the shelf. And between the time it took you to go up the rest of the way, somebody had already gotten it and taken it and sat down at a desk to read. And you know, there's a lot of stuff to read in there. You would have to wait for an hour or two for them to give it up before you could take a look at it again. And 2 or 3 years later, you could just go onto the website and everybody could read it simultaneously at the same time. There are sort of advantages to that. But I was thinking of we were talking a little bit about the individual life of the reader and that the book is something we experience in solitude.
Yeah.
There is a kind of parallel to that the book has a kind of social life of its own, although it is a solitary work in itself. And that social life is kind of denied by this digital self. When you have a set of digital files, so like all the classics of the world on your laptop, they kind of still kind of exist in isolation, a kind of dreary isolation as a piece of data. Whereas when you go to somebody's house, you kind of and look at the library, and I think one of the things that I really like most disappoints me, I find I go and speak at colleges and schools often, I really like the fact that kids today read such a lot. But I think one of the trends which I'm disappointed by is the demise of the idea of a personal library in which you took pride and which took center space in your household. It wasn't the television, but when you came in, there was a shelf where sort of revealed who you are by your choice of books.
By the choice of your books,
kind of a personal taste. That, I think, that social life of books is very, very important, because when you have a library, it's not only that you look at it all the time and people who pass into your life look at it. It's almost like those books are in conversation with one another. I mean, the meanings of the book are no longer just what exists between the covers of each individual book. Some of those meanings are across the covers of all the books put together. And in a way, by having books from the 14th century linked up alongside a book from the 18th century, we kind of speak to the genius of human tradition and invention in its own way, that all these minds, isn't it remarkable that you can open something and a voice of somebody who's been dead 600 or 700 years, and that cannot be replicated, like comes right out at you, and you have a sense of communion with somebody from another age, another time, another millennium, another century. So in that way, I think there's something about the printed book that most of the meanings of literature, one way or another, sort of come together in this form. It could be that many of these meanings also exist in forms around it, but in a way, the book is the sun of the solar system, of the universe of the literary world. And that, I think, it's hard to shift an object so big,
That's true. Bookstores across the country, are shutting down. I mean, recently in Delhi, there was so much heartache when Fact and Fiction closed down. And, I remember the owner writing this very emotional farewell message and saying that, I'm sorry, I'm not selling enough. So why is that happening? Why do you think bookstores are forced to shut shop?
There's a more fundamental philosophical question. Is it that applies equally to digital book selling also? Okay. No, we are talking in isolation. We are talking in context of digital versus printed books. Now, bookstores are shutting down because the space, commercial space, is more remunerative in doing something else. So you could ask the question about why are good, classy restaurants shutting down? Why are bespoke tailoring shops shutting down?
But does it not also mean that people are not buying enough books?
No, people are not buying enough books, I don't think is verified by data. I don't know. Otherwise, publishers would have shut shop and gone into diversified business. So they are only thinking in terms of publishing in a different format like digital format.
Ebook,
But they have not stopped printing hardcovers or in the printed format either. So I don't think that book selling or book publishing is becoming extinct as a business. Bookshops, yes. Because we are having this conversation and Mani Rao and I are sitting at the same table and she said it is much more convenient for me to order through Flipkart. So if you order through Flipkart, have delivery guaranteed at home, don't have to spend money on scooter or fumes and pay on cash on delivery, bookshop would be eliminated. But printed book would not be, because she is not getting delivered at her home. She could have got a digital PDF downloaded. She is still getting a printed book delivered at home electronically through digital means. And what a little earlier Chandrahas referred to another thing, I mean, it's very interesting that when you talk in terms of digital, it doesn't mean a digital format of hypertext markup language in this format. It very well could be a digitally desktop printed book which is printed limited edition individually, 5 copies, 10 copies, 100 copies. So that is probably the intermediate grey zone which we shall see flourishing more in this transition period.
Wonderful. So I think we have just 10 minutes left. So before I wrap up this discussion and open the floor for the audience questions, let me just read out this wonderful poem by Gulzar. We were talking about Gulzar Sahab in the earlier session and what a wonderful poet he is. This poem is titled Kitabein, and he's sharing the same angst that we are discussing here, that we have moved away from books to computers. So it's a very short poem, but I think it's very pertinent here. किताबें झांकती हैं बंद अलमारी के शीशों से, भारी हसरत से ताकती हैं, महीनों अब मुलाकातें नहीं होती। जो शामें उनकी सोबत में काटा करते थे, अब अक्सर गुजर जाती हैं कंप्यूटर के पर्दों पर। कोई पन्ना पलटता हूं तो एक सिसकी निकलती है, कई लफ्जों के माने गिरे पड़े हैं, जुबां पे जो आता था जायका पन्ना पलटने का, अब उंगली क्लिक करने से झपकी गुजर जाती है। कभी किताबों को सीने पर रखे लेट जाते थे, कभी गोद में लेते थे। खुदा ने चाहा तो वो सारा इल्म मिलता रहेगा बाद में भी, मगर, और इस मगर पे गौर फरमाइए, मगर वो जो किताबों में मिलते थे सूखे हुए फूल, किताबें मांगने, गिरने, उठाने के बहाने जो रिश्ते बनते थे, अब उनका क्या होगा? Yeah. So that's of course the genius of Gulzar as always. And now let's have questions from the audience. Okay, there's one at the back right there. Can we have a mic for the gentleman?
Good afternoon.
Hello, sir.
I'm very happy to be here again today. Basically, I want to share an opinion, an experience, and something because a very young audience is here. And people sitting there also range from 70 to 35 maybe. So, sir, I have two things to tell. One has been my personal experience with books. For the last 50 years, whenever I just go through my shelf sometimes, just to make them okay, I travel through 50 years of my life, various stations, various wheelers, various places. That has been one of the very wonderful experiences of mine. Some friends whom I have not met for a long time, who have presented me a book, it's been written in that. So looking at the young audience here, this was one thing and I would like your opinion on that. That is, this particular written books which we keep in our shelves, do they help us to travel in our life whenever we have a look at them at any given moment of time, or any one of you have experienced anything of that kind? And the second one, so people talk of a lot of quotes. I don't know if this is quotable quote of Pluto or not, but somehow it just came to my mind. I must have read it, I don't know when, that home is incomplete without a library. Now, there used to be a library in Pluto's time, or I have no idea, but this was one thing which struck me right now when we were talking about this particular thing. And if you can, sir, with your experience, add something to this journey of our life, those who have been purchasing books from the last, say for me, sir, it's 50 years. I'm going to be 65 and I've been purchasing books from 50.
If this gentleman is talking of experience, I take it my baldness and my grey beard directs the question to me, not the youngsters.
Specifically towards Mr. Pushpesh Pant.
I think the 2 points very interesting, sir. First, you referred, the first part of your comment referred to the younger audience. And believe you me, I was also young once, around their age. So I think these youngsters will learn to read and read well and cherish books, and I'm very confident they will go through life enriching their lives and enriching the world with their books and with books they read. That's one part. And the second part, I think, sir, you have made a very valid point that each house, no house is complete without a library. And we don't need a library of the British variety. There is a room in a library where the gentleman retired after dinner for cigar and sherry and things of that kind. You might have a single book. And most houses, iske pehle wala session bada stimulating tha, savere wala, तो उत्तर प्रदेश बिहार के घरों में हिंदी हार्टलैंड में एक ही किताब हो सकती थी. वो रामचरितमानस हो सकती थी, वो शायद गीता की कॉपी हो सकती थी, महाभारत घर में रखने का रिवाज नहीं था, द ग्रेटेस्ट स्टोरी की झगड़ा होता था, मगर सुख सागर हो सकता था, मगर एक किताब के इर्द गिर्द घर की दुनिया चलती थी. people used to recite it, वो हनुमान चालीसा हो सकती थी कि मंगल के दिन आप हनुमान जी के दर्शन करते थे, लड्डू खाते थे, हनुमान चालीसा रटते थे, और वो आपके हाड़ मांस में रच बस जाती थी. It was part of your DNA, it was part of your food prescriptions and prohibitions, it was part of your भूत पिशाच निकट नहीं आवे, महावीर जब नाम सुनावे variety, होए सोई जो राम रचि राखा, काकनी तरक बढ़ावी शाखा. So folk wisdom and all these books were personal and they were treated nicely. अगर आप सिख हैं, घर में गुरु ग्रंथ साहब है, उसको संभाल के रखते हैं, and you had a certain sanctity about a book. So these books were sacred not because they were holy books, because learning was sacred, culture was sacred, and tradition passed down from generation to another was sacred. So I think that's what book is all about.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, we have a question here in the front.
Satyarth, This side. Hi.
Oh,
I
okay.
have a question.
Okay.
The Delhi School of Economics, where I did my master's, has a photocopy shop. And right now there's a controversy that's going on that a lot of publishers of academic books are saying that how can you, photocopy these books, and now there are thousands of copies. So nobody's buying the original books. So if you go to the library and you, say, pick up Max Weber's Protestant Ethic and Spirit of Capitalism, you'll find only 4 copies. Everybody wants to read it from that. But when you're 22, 23, there's so much hunger in you for so much different kinds of, there's politics, there's economics, there's geography. You want to read everything. And it's more convenient like this because you go to the photocopy shop, they'll scan the book, and it's actually, I think the romance is more in the thought. Like, I don't care about, say, it's nice to have a library, to have the classics, everything has its place. But when I'm hungry for knowledge and I'm hungry for thought, I'm not going to give a hoot about, oh, this book is like the paper is so good or the cover is good, and I want the knowledge. Like
so you're saying it's content that matters and not the format.
I feel like for fiction writers and for fiction, like if I'm reading Jonathan Franzen, I'll want to read it from the book because, I have that thing with the author. But I'm not going to have that thing with 500 authors. And I still want to know what they're saying. So it's also about fiction and non-fiction,
No, I think you have got me all wrong. I'm not that kind of a romantic. I think the library has a place for a pirated, photocopied book also. It's not only Delhi School of Economics, this is Mr. Singh's Photoshop near Law Faculty. And having started teaching my teaching career in Ramjas College in 1969, memory serves me right, piracy of books was even taking place then. And at the age of 70, post-retirement, I am teaching, unfortunately, inconveniently, intellectual property law and copyright infringements in a law university. So the issue you are raising, lady, is a non-issue. It is a fake question, if I may put it bluntly. In my library...
I feel that, because when I was doing my master's, I wanted more and more information.
You are very hungry
Why do they want to shut the photocopy shop?
No, you are very hungry for knowledge at your age, and please don't presume that I am not hungry at my age. I am hungrier and more impatient than you because lady,
but there are lots of other students
I have lesser number of days accurately insurance-wise than you to survive in this world. So my hunger and my impatience is greater than yours. My poverty is greater. You are earning, our graph is going to be upper trajectory.
Be. I'm not saying that. I'm just
allow
saying
me to finish. Allow me to finish, lady. Allow me to finish. Then I will wait and listen to you in comfort. I think you should have the patience before asking a question to say that I had never suggested that a library doesn't have a place for a pirated photocopied book. That is why I made the example of a single book forming a library. So the quest for knowledge and hunger and how you acquire your knowledge is one way. It could be, as the whole discussion was, it could be digitally acquired from PDF files, it could be hypertext marked languages, it could be a pirated book. There is no dispute about that. As long as some entity has content, either fiction or non-fiction or pure. We started our discussion whether OED or Encyclopedia Britannica are the fitting examples of this. So I don't think there is a dispute on that.
Pallavi, I think we can have this discussion outside the sessions because there are a lot more people.
Sir, I have a question.
Right in the front, this gentleman, can he please be given a mic?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, sir, go ahead, please.
I hope I am audible.
Yes.
It's a brilliant session worthy of a university audience.
Thank you.
And one of the ideas that hasn't really come through is the notion of the closure. The notion of the closure. If you look at book history and print capitalism history, you understand that conventionally speaking, the idea of a sequel was there. The idea of publication, for example, in serialized journals that Dickens cherished, for example, was there. Now, radically, for example, if you look at the digital medium, for example, the idea of the closure has been completely revolutionized. And there are, for example, forums where readers of the digital medium are encouraged to really give their own ending itself. If you were to go back to the idea of the ending, Sense of an Ending by Frank Kermode, you find that this is where, for example, the digital medium, with all the kinds of assurances of the earlier form, for example, might be granted. But the digital medium has an upper hand with regard to the notion of the closure itself. So I would like these seasoned participants to throw light on this idea of the closure vis-a-vis the earlier version and the print version.
Okay. Shovon, would you like to take that question?
I think, let me explain what I had in mind.
Yeah.
What I had in mind is that when an author would write the sequel, for example, it would be painstakingly done in the journal medium, for example, initially. Later on, it will be turned out into a book form. And I'm referring to the 19th century book writing tradition.
Yeah.
Now, with regard to the digital medium, for example, it's been completely revolutionized because one doesn't have to take recourse to a journal, to a sequel. One, for example, in a wider domain, the readers are encouraged to give their own ending itself. So the notion of the closure itself has been completely revolutionized, and I wanted some of you to throw light on that.
Well, I mean, in terms of writing, it's the sense of a ghoshit lekhak, as they said in the last session. It's the notion that you're holding a book in your. So you're absolutely right. And when you hold that printed book in your hand, and for the first time, you feel, wow, man, I'm now an author. Yeah. So yes, that sense of closure when you're printing digitally, you don't get it. But that holding the book in your hand is a very ephemeral thing. I think the closure or sense of some purpose being achieved comes when at least 5 people have read that book and talked to you about it or liked it or disliked it, which is very common in my case, and sort of want to beat you up. But whatever it might be, if they start engaging with you as a writer, you feel a sense of closure. So that could happen digitally, it could happen, through a printed book. But you're right in the sense that, when you do a digital publishing thing, you don't get that sense of, it's like blogging. Blogging has become like a gateway to being an author. Because of WordPress and so many others, you can instantly put up a blog and feel like I'm now a publisher. And that's an incentive for doing at least 5 to 10 posts. You'll see a lot of blogs where there are basically about 10, after which the enthusiasm sort of wanes, or theek hai, das kar diya. So to some extent, I think the pre-packaged software, which makes your stuff look very good and look professional, that gives you some sense of, closure. Equally, like Chandrahas was saying that it's much cheaper to create a digital book, or they're practically no cost. I just differ a little bit in the sense that, a good designer and a good editor would still, so you can invest that money, in which case it's not just the printed word going on the page. There's a process that happens before the actual digital publication. Somebody's designed a lovely cover, and an editor has sort of helped you to tighten up or firm up the story. So then when that final thing comes out, I guess you'd feel, ki haan, kuch kiya hai life mein.
Yeah, so I have a question to everybody. Would things like the Kindle make the printed book a little less relevant in the years to come? It even feels like a book, right? And then it's very personal.
It tries very hard to,
but it does. You see many of these young kids in the, let's say, not kids, but people in their 25 to 35 bracket, taking on to Kindle. You even get titles, free of cost. That's very convenient. You don't really need to have a physical book stacked in your,
You're talking about convenience, basically, the whole idea of convenience.
No, it's also the personalized feeling, the personalized reading bit of it.
I thought we had addressed that in the...
Very quick answer to that. Because the Kindle shares a model of digital reception with so many other kinds of electronic products, what you do see now is that the Kindle, which seemed like it would supplant the book, has itself been supplanted by the iPad and the mobile phone. I think actually, if you wait another 10 years, we won't even... Another generation of kids won't know what this word was. They'll think it was something like fondle or like something we can't. A verb form of
Thank you.
There was a question here,
Ebooks have substituted that's print.
To be slightly louder, please.
So it came out from the discussion of the panel that the ebooks is going to substitute the the print version. So my point is here, as per the discussion that all of you have just met. So don't you think that there's the digitalization of this, literature, in the world of literature, the knowledge epistemological system is just for the cheaper sake on the either for this better on the technology. Is it not this running away from the devil? So to emerge in the deep like situation. So here to rest. So can you just, don't you agree with that? The digitalization will lead to a very disastrous effect in future. And the younger generation, by subscribing to the very cheaper and these accessible these ebooks, and it is a very severe ramification over this democratization of knowledge and accessibility too. Please.
Okay.
That's not a good question. Therefore, there can be no good answers to your question.
No, come on. I think
attempt a bad answer.
I'll give a bad answer. If it was a bad question, I'll give a bad answer. No? Then we're all even. I think that the Kindle. If you look at the Kindle, It's about 4,000 rupees now, right? 4,000, 4,500 rupees.
600 rupees unless the discount bargain sale is on. Even
Yeah.
4,999
So generally 6,000.
for a basic model. The top of the line model is 13,995 rupees with the 3G and cellular.
You have the dealership in Delhi, right? I mean, yeah, okay. I'll, if you give me a discount, sir, I'd like 2, 3. Yeah, okay.
It's
So,
not
but
even worth buying after a discount. Buy a book.
no, okay. No, I'll do both. But, you know, to answer your question, you're talking about, don't you think ebooks will become more popular? I think the Kindle is very disruptive technology, and there are two things that can happen. One is the Kindle can become much cheaper. You know, they might start bundling it or figuring that, look, we'll make money on the books. We're going to sell it for 1,000 rupees. And that would certainly revolutionize things if they took that chance, right? The other is that the tablet might become more it will become more technologically capable, and they'll crack that glare problem. Because all this screen stuff with carpal tunnel syndrome only started cropping up about maybe 5 years, 7 years after people started using computers. Then they figured out that ये भी एक चीज है, carpal tunnel syndrome. So similarly, the effect it's having on our eyes, people will start realizing, you know. So if the tablet cracks that technological point of glare, and given that it's a multifunctional device, that's actually good news for all of us, because it would make books much more accessible to a lot more people, you know, with a greater degree of convenience and cost. At this point, like his numbers were saying, it's still a dodgy. I mean, ebooks are there, but they're not growing very fast. You know, it's kind of stuck in the same place for the last 2-3 years. There's not been a massive change. So yeah, if technology moves forward and does one of those two things.
And let's just end by saying that ultimately I think it's the reader who is the final winner, because now that you have so many options to read, there is no excuse not to read. So just keep that in mind. Okay.
It's okay. You can take the question off the dice. Thank you so much. May I now request the editorial director of the New Indian Express, Mr. Prabhu Chawla, to please come on stage and present mementos to all our esteemed panelists here. I think the topic itself was so interesting. We are getting more and more questions for the panelists, but the rest of the questions can all be taken off the dice.
Oh, photo.
For a better photo opportunity.